Hello and welcome to week 3 of Stats Chat with me, Z for Carlo, where I'm going to take the week's submissions, the last 7 days in A Song of Ice and Fire stats, and look at what those submissions have done to the meta, the faction rankings, and basically the commanders, see who's looking interesting, and try and dismantle that for you and find where we can find our interesting talking points and see what we can learn from the week in general. This is, as I say, our third installment, so if you've seen the others and you're waiting on this one to get released, then I really recommend that you give the channel a subscribe, give the video a like to make sure that I know that this is the kind of content that you want to see. And if you haven't already watched the other 2 videos, then go back and give them a watch, because I do discuss different things every week, and you never know, you might learn something. So let's dive straight in with our faction power rankings. Now, last week, we saw the Baratheons finally drag themselves off of that bottom spot, overtaking the Targaryens for the first time in their history. And we discussed whether or not we thought they would continue that trend and how high they are actually going to end up. We have finally seen them start to stall in how many points they are gaining each week. But interestingly, it has not stopped them from taking 4th spot. They have overtaken the Night's Watch and the Neutral this week. But that's as much because of falls in Night's Watch and Neutral points as it is caused by the rise in the Baratheons. The Starks, who have been clawing their way closer to that top spot, have also had a bit of a mixed bag. They've only gained a few points this week, and while the Free Folk continue to lose their dominant position at the top, mostly because they are not managing to maintain an incredibly high win rate, so that basically costs them every time they're not posting a 65-70% win rate in a week. But the big takeaway this week, the big surprise for me, is that Lannisters have jumped forward from where they've been sat at a comfortable, effectively 0 rating, very balanced, and this week they have gained a lot. Looking at Lannisters specifically, they have gained 36 ranking points in a week. This is a huge jump, and so far I've basically avoided talking about Lannisters because in some ways they are quite old news. They haven't had anything new, any new tricks in quite a long time, and all the attention has moved on to the Baratheons, the things that they are now bringing to the table. And the old Stark versus Lannister dynamic basically didn't feel like it had anything left. But what's really interesting, I think, about this rise in the Lannisters is that when we look over the past 7 days, we see 30 submissions. They remain ever popular, not actually in the TTS event. So a lot of these submissions have come outside of the tournament, but I do know that they are by the same players that are competing in this event. They are still high caliber lists and high performance players. This isn't just a case of lesser players using Lannisters in a non-competitive environment. They are still being used in a very top tier way, I believe. And interestingly, there is a new dynamic developing, I believe, which does favour the Lannisters. Now, the Lannisters' biggest problem has, in my opinion, always been that what they struggle to do is beat the Starks. They are generally out-activated, and unlike a lot of other factions, they don't have a great toolset for dealing with those direwolves. This generally means that throughout the last 7 days and all time, they've always been on the bad end of the Stark-Lannister matchup. But as the Baratheons rise in popularity, and it's quite clear that the 3 most popular factions through submission numbers and tournament entries in general is Starks, Lannisters, and Baratheons. And we're starting to see something of a 3-way triangle here, which is that the Baratheons have a lot of tools to deal with the Starks and take that matchup very well. The Starks have always dominated the Lannisters, but the Lannisters, it seems, have all the tools they need to take on the Baratheons. In at number 5 for the top performing commanders this week, we see Jeor of the Night's Watch. What is interesting about the Night's Watch right now is that they seem to have very good balance, internal balance, for the relative power levels of their commanders. Long gone are the days when Jon was the outstanding performer and the almost only choice that you should take. We today have ourselves a lot of different options, and really it becomes a question of what style do you want to play into and what is the pairing and lists that you're trying to build. Coming in at number 4, we see Loras from the Renly Loyalty Baratheons. Interestingly, Loras seems to have gone quite under the radar so far. He has some of the lowest submissions of all the high-ranking commanders, but he is, in those small number of submissions, performing incredibly well with an 80% win ratio. This is not from the last week, though. We are talking 10 submissions ever so far for Loras. So I think that more people need to get out there and give him a go. I think that he is overlooked in favour of Renly when picking an on-field commander, either variant of Renly, but that he himself has a ton of synergy with the Rose Knights, while also providing a more offensive dynamic and allowing you to rely on the Rose Knight's defensive inbuilt capabilities while providing spikes of damage with his cards rather than spikes of defense. I do prefer the proactive way in which he plays and the way you can surprise your opponent with aggressive plays rather than surprising your opponent with defensive plays. That said, he generally needs more submissions and needs more data, so get out there and give him a go. Coming in at 3, I'm finally glad to say that Renly is appearing not in the bottom performers this week. It just goes to show that every commander has their place, and he has managed to post himself a plus 14 rating. It still leaves him as the lowest ranked commander of all commanders in the game with a minus 79. But he has finally managed to achieve a positive win ratio at 57%, 4 of 7 submissions. And I think that this is maybe playing into the fact that Fire and Blood is really where, if you're going to win with him, that's a great place for him, as is Feast for Crows. And like I said earlier, they are the 2 game modes that we've been playing into in the TTS event recently. So I think that, again, it may be temporary for Renly, but he does have his place. And I'm glad to not be talking about him as the lowest performer once again this week. Coming in at number 2 as the second highest performing commander this week, we see the High Sparrow. He is one of my favourite commanders and an old staple of what I would always use in a tournament. I think he has great strength in a lot of game modes, not just those that are specific to giving NCU commanders the advantage. In the past week, he's had 11 submissions and he has won 72% of those games. This is great percentages and is really showing how strong he is. The only caveat on that is you can see that almost none of these results have come in the tournament. In possibly the biggest shock of the week, Joffrey Baratheon has managed to take the number 1 spot, achieving a plus 30.5 rating. He has single-handedly managed to bring the Lannisters up into a competitive 3rd spot, whereas they were previously languishing down in that 5th and 6th position of the power rankings. He is really performing well, both in the tournament and outside the tournament. And if you're interested in discussing in further discussions about Joffrey's power and what that might mean and where that might come from, then I recommend that you go and listen to last night's episode from Small Council Radio, where Nick from Mythico Studios discussed with the Small Council Radio hosts that his personal experience of using Joffrey in the tournament. That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me again on Stats Chat. If you've liked the video, if you've liked any of the content that I'm producing, I'd love it if you gave the video a like and subscribe to the channel. I'll just end by saying we are coming into the last couple of weeks of the NRG TTS League, and I think that everybody's really enjoyed the event. I think that it's gone very well and it's been a great showcase for the stats site and also for what we can do with TTS in these lockdown times. I want to point out that there is another event currently being organized and starting very soon. It's called Assault on River Run and is being run by Toy Soldier Imports. And it has been designed to ensure that all the Australian and New Zealand players who missed out on the first NRG TTS League had a place to go and play, because there were a lot who were both on the waiting list and didn't make it on in time. But this has now been opened up to the rest of the world, now that the Toy Soldier Imports have ensured that all those Australians have got their place. So it will have a lean towards the Australian time zone. You need to be aware that you may have to play games outside of the normal times if you want to enter this, but entry is open, and I really recommend that you go on and play that, join that if you have the time. I do know that there are some other events currently being organized and will be run through the site as well. I think that we are expecting a both North American and European only tournament to be run soon. And I think people are just hashing out the final details on that. So keep your eyes peeled. If you missed out on the first NRG TTS League, or you just want more tournaments, more games, and you've really enjoyed playing in the first event, then I really recommend sign up. And really, we're just getting the ball rolling in terms of what we can do both in TTS and in physical events that are run through A Song of Ice and Fire Stats.